Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Heather McDonald.
We've got Thanksgiving right around the corner, so herewith my thanks. We no longer have to listen to that voice, hear that cackle, or feel that joy. So, Edward Blum has done more to eradicate racial preferences from our body politic than any other human being alive today. Tonight, he is receiving the Jeane Kirkpatrick Prize for Academic Freedom, a prize created in tribute to Ambassador Kirkpatrick's, quote, brave stand for free speech on campus. What is the connection between free speech and Edward's accomplishments? Quite simply, nothing has provoked more draconian silencing than affirmative action. Anyone on a college campus who dares to state the obvious, that his university employs vast double standards in admissions and hiring, will be denounced and shunned. Anyone who points out the negative effects of preferences on their alleged beneficiaries risks his job. Professors have been fired over private conversations wistfully lamenting the poor performance of their black students. Edward hates this intellectual reign of terror, but he's been motivated by an even more basic drive, the belief in justice. He contemplates racial preferences and sees not a blow against white supremacy, but a violation of America's founding ideals of fairness and equal opportunity for all. So, how do you move from being, as Edward was, a financial portfolio manager to becoming the nation's premier advocate for colorblindness? You run for a congressional seat in Texas. In 1992, Edward jumped into a U.S. House race because otherwise there would have been no Republicans on the ballot. Edward quaintly thought that his neighbors deserved a political choice. The Texas government had other plans in mind. In his door-to-door campaigning, Edward discovered the two homes right next to each other could be in different congressional districts based on the skin color of their occupants. His district in Houston, the 18th, was a 30-mile-long monstrosity concocted to connect every possible black voter and to exclude as many non-blacks in order to guarantee a black seat in Congress. Edward lost his congressional race, but the country won. Having grown up in a liberal Jewish household in Houston, Edward knew his civil rights history. He could remember the days when racial segregation was deemed a bad thing. Now it was being presented as a civil rights advance. So Edward organized a lawsuit claiming that the 18th Congressional District violated the 14th Amendment. No Texas lawyer would take on Ed's case. The Justice Department, on the other hand, easily found 50 of the nation's top attorneys to defend the right of government to sequester voters by race. The racial gerrymanders pursued their atavistic cause all the way up to the Supreme Court, and to the surprise of all, not least Edward himself, the neo-segregationists lost. With Edward's very first foray into civil rights litigation having concluded in a Supreme Court victory, bond trading in the municipal utility market lost some of its luster. He started suing other states for their voting maps, and again won landmark rulings at the Supreme Court. If Edward had not pivoted to university admissions, he would be known today for his voting rights successes, and of course, would be equally hated by the left. But what a pivot that was. Even when Edward lost in court by narrow majorities, he pried open admissions data that had been buried more securely than the deep state playbook, and blew the lid off the fiction that schools were not admitting racially defined groups of students with vastly different academic skills. Edward is a patient man as well as a persistent one, and in 2023, his patience and persistence paid off. After years of excruciatingly incoherent decisions upholding admissions preferences, the Supreme Court finally fulfilled its constitutional duties and declared that Harvard and the University of North Carolina were violating the rights of their white and Asian students. Panic engulfed the academic world and its mirror image in corporate America. The resistance has already begun. No, you don't want them to win. The rebel college presidents think that they can outfox and outlast Edward. Very bad bet. To understand Edward's significance, listen to how one of his detractors characterizes him, quote, "Edward Blum is one of the most dangerous men in America, a human wrecking ball on a mission to destroy the landmark achievements of the civil rights era and send the country back to a dark age of discrimination and harassment of minorities." Ladies and gentlemen, I bring you the human wrecking ball, out of whose labors a fairer nation is being built. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather, for those remarkably kind and inflationary comments. It looks like Jerome Powell still has some work in front of him. Before I begin my remarks, I'd like to recognize two groups that the Greek poet Archilochus classifies: foxes and hedgehogs. A fox knows many things, but a hedgehog knows one big thing. First, let me recognize some who know one big thing: my fellow hedgehogs, the board of directors of Students for Fair Admissions, all of whom are in attendance here tonight. Eva Guo, Joe Zhao, Richard Fisher, and Abby Fisher. Many of you will remember Abby from her 2 trips to the United States Supreme Court, challenging the University of Texas's race-based admissions policies. She stepped forward when dozens of other students just like her would not. Abby is a courageous young woman. Thank you, Abby Fisher. More on courage and the diminishing quantities of it a bit later. Joining us also is a table of very talented foxes, those knowing many things, the men and women of Consovoy McCarthy, the law firm that litigated the SFFA cases. In 2014, they examined Harvard's admissions practices, cracked their knuckles, and sued. They each have the heart and bite of a lion, and I had the luck just to be called upon to give the roar. Consovoy McCarthy is here with us tonight. Sadly, though, one of the most remarkable lawyers at Consovoy McCarthy, Will Consovoy, died before the SFFA opinion was released. He, more than anyone else, was the legal energy behind the lawsuit. We miss him, and may his memory be for a blessing. And finally, I want to recognize a foxy hedgehog, my wife of 43 years, Lark Bloom. All of the mishigas, now that's a Yiddish word meaning trouble, that I have endeavored to create over the last 35 years has been lovingly encouraged by Lark. Thank you, darling. I stand here tonight with immense gratitude and humility, honored to be the recipient of the Encounter Books Jeane Kirkpatrick Prize for Academic Freedom. This recognition is not only a personal privilege, but an acknowledgement of the cause to which so many of us have dedicated our time, efforts, and passions. First and foremost, I want to extend my sincere thanks to Roger Kimball and the team at Encounter Books for this incredible honor. Your commitment to the preservation of intellectual rigor and the free exchange of ideas is a unique beacon in today's world of media and publishing. You have consistently published works that challenge the status quo, and importantly, encourage thoughtful and vigorous debate. To receive this award from such a respected institution is truly humbling. Jeane Kirkpatrick, in whose name this award is given, was a woman of extraordinary intellect, courage, and conviction. I had the privilege to be in residence at the American Enterprise Institute here in Washington, D.C., when she had her offices there as well. We spoke a few times, and I very wisely listened much more than I spoke. She understood in every one of her roles the perils of complacency in the face of unfairness and the necessity of battling for what is right. When I founded Students for Fair Admissions in 2014, it was with a clear vision and a simple, singular purpose: to end the use of race as an admissions factor at all institutions of higher education. It was, and still is, a mission born out of the fundamental belief in the principles of meritocracy and individual achievement. SFFA's guiding principle is that race-based admissions policies, no matter how well-intentioned, are unfair, deeply polarizing, and illegal. These policies have led to the systematic discrimination of certain groups, particularly Asian Americans, in favor of others. This is not just a political issue or a legal issue. It is a moral issue. It is about the kind of society we want to be, the values we want to uphold, and the future we want to create for our children and grandchildren. In recent years, as we have seen the debate over affirmative action intensify, and just not in college admissions. Today, what Chief Justice John Roberts called in a 2006 racial gerrymandering case, and I'll quote now, "the sordid business of divvying us up by race," end quote. It's ubiquitous. Hiring, promoting, internships, fellowships, contracting, and as Heather pointed out, voting districts are often predicated on skin color and ethnic heritage. As a result, most of our nation has learned that race preference is the soil in which racial polarization grows. As our most competitive colleges and universities come to terms, or not, with the SFFA opinion, it is essential to remember that our goal is not to diminish the number of racial minorities on campus or to undermine the progress that has been made toward equal opportunity. Rather, our goal is to ensure that the means by which we achieve these ends are just, fair, and consistent with the principles of our nation's civil rights laws and our Constitution. The legal battles that SFFA and its sister organization, the Project on Fair Representation, have undertaken over the years, particularly our case against Harvard, have been driven by that very conviction. Unfortunately, it is no surprise that these efforts have been met with significant resistance from nearly every corner of the higher education world. I do not know of a single college leader who publicly applauded the Harvard opinion, except of course, Larry Arnn. Nevertheless, thank you. Nevertheless, SFFA's lawsuits have garnered overwhelming support from individuals and organizations across the country who share our belief in the importance of meritocracy and color-blind admissions policies. Color-blind admissions policies. In the culture war this nation has fought over wokeness, the SFFA opinion is like the Allied landing at Normandy Beach. Truly, the easiest part of my job during the last 10 years has been to convince our fellow citizens that race should not be used to determine whether a young man or young woman is accepted or rejected from a college or a university. In dozens of polls since the SFFA opinion was released, significant majorities of Americans of all races support the outcome. I'm out on a limb when I say this, but I'll go there anyway. The opinion in Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard is one of the most popular opinions in the recent history of Supreme Court jurisprudence. It has the approval of nearly 70% of our fellow citizens. That high approval rating, though, did not mean that student members easily stepped up to join SFFA over the years so that this organization could remain, in the language of the courts, in good standing. Let me now recount to you a little sidebar of the Harvard litigation that is emblematic of the dedication of SFFA's members, who, because of their courage, changed the course of higher education, and it is to be hoped, American jurisprudence. Now, imagine you are a 17 or 18-year-old. While in your senior year of high school, you were rejected from Harvard, joined SFFA as a standing member. A standing member is like a participating member. And now you are in your first few days as a freshman at, for instance, Vanderbilt or Rice or Texas A&M or Northwestern. Further imagine that after a few weeks of classes, you will be compelled to spend 2 long days with SFFA's lawyers preparing to be deposed by a team of Harvard's lawyers, and then relentlessly deposed by that bloodthirsty team for 4 to 5 hours. The first group of students who joined SFFA knew that this could be their fate. I warned them. The lawyers at Consovoy McCarthy warned them. Nevertheless, they stayed in the fight, knowing that they would never benefit personally from the outcome of this litigation. This took courage, a quality Harvard's admissions officers found lacking in Asian Americans, as FFFA learned from the personality scores assigned to all applicants during the Harvard litigation. What SFFA's lawyers and I witnessed in each of these young men and women, and of course their parents, many of whom fled the tyranny of communist China, was a quiet act of resistance to the attacks on meritocracy, diligence, and excellence. There is a young man here tonight who was at the forefront of our fight against Harvard, Harrison Chen. Courage is the most important value, and Harrison has it. Thank you, Harrison Chen at table 23. Now that racial classifications and preferences have been formally declared unconstitutional, real educational reform for K through 12 might be addressed. And just as importantly, perhaps more so, real and necessary changes in family, societal, and institutional values might be addressed as well. Students for Fair Admissions will not let this victory go to our collective heads. In dozens of admissions offices for undergraduate, postgraduate, law, and medical schools throughout the country, the worshipers of intersectionality are experimenting with novel racial proxies to achieve what racial classifications and preferences once accomplished. Our legal lions have their litigation sights on a handful of schools that seem to be flouting the law. As Winston Churchill said after a significant victory in a battle during World War II, this movement recognizes that we are not at the beginning of the end, but rather at the end of the beginning. So let me conclude by sharing to you what I think is one of the most consequential and unsurprisingly overlooked benefits of the end of affirmative action. And it is this: every student admitted to MIT, Harvard, Johns Hopkins, Amherst, and many other competitive colleges and universities will know that they were not accepted merely to provide targeted color optics to campuses. This important outcome, this unarticulated outcome, was best said by Justice Clarence Thomas in a fervent dissent in Grutter versus Bollinger, the 2003 University of Michigan lawsuit that allowed racial diversity in admissions in order to achieve racial diversity. He wrote the following, that when racial minorities, quote, take positions in the highest places of government, industry, or academia, it is an open question today whether their skin color played a part in their advancement. Well, the question itself is the stigma, because asking the question unfairly marks minorities who would succeed without racial preferences. So it took 10 years for SFFA, our lawyers, our members, our supporters, to begin the restoration of the colorblind legal covenant that binds us together as a nation. As it is said, the impossible takes longer. Thank you.